step forward.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have one of our biggest interviews yet. We have a comic legend in the building, Mr. Graham Nolan. How you doing, sir?
I'm good, Charlie. How are you? Hi, Ethan.
Hey, Graham. It's good to see you, brother.
Excellent.
Yeah, good to be here, man.
To get to my eye, I'm Charlie Wilson. Also, we have our co-host here, Mr. Brother Ethan. How you doing, Brother E?
How could I be doing, man? I have someone that literally molded my childhood and my current job, so I'm really good. I'm flying high.
You're making me feel old.
I'm 12, so I'm not sure.
There we go.
Sure.
There we go.
I'm this many, so there's that. I don't really know what to say outside of that. Mr. Nolan, I guess we'll kind of get into it. Obviously, for people that don't know who Mr. Nolan is an iconic illustrator and also is a co-creator of one of the biggest villains in comics known to date, Mr. Bane. He has also worked on other works such as Transformers, I believe, like 1988, if I remember correctly, and other stuff.
Transformers 85 or 86, yeah.
Did my research is slightly off then. Okay. He's worked on a plethora of great things, as well as his own personal works that we'll get into later this episode. But Mr. Long, I gotta know what kind of got you into comics? How did you become such a fan of the profession you're in now?
I had a teacher in the 6th grade bring in a stack of comics for the kids to read during recess. And there was all different kinds of superhero comics that I had never seen before. And there was a Justice League comic that had all these characters that I knew from like TV shows like Superman, Batman, Aquaman. And so that was really the start of it. I was a monster kid before that. So I used to like monster movies and monster magazines and building the Aurora model kits and stuff like that. And there was some tertiary comics information in there. So I would see what was happening in the magazine that was going on in the comics world, but I wasn't really into it yet until the 6th grade.
You talked about some of those characters you recognize. Did you have any particular characters that were your favorites or that kind of resonated with you when you were first introduced?
Superman and Batman, easy. Because the Batman TV show was hot when I was a little boy. And I used to watch The Adventures of Superman on reruns. Back then it was 4 TV stations. We watched them on little black and white TV sets. So there wasn't a lot of choices, but what they had was, some great stuff. So those two were my favorites.
Okay, that's great.
No, I find it interesting, Graham, because obviously you embrace the villainy in comic book stories and the storytelling so much. I know obviously in your own work, which you've done before, of course, when you're creating things like Monster Island and things of that nature. It's funny that you have done such a great job with the big bads, even in things in Dungeons and Dragons of that nature. Yet what got you into it originally was the heroes, the iconic Boy Scout heroes.
Referring to Superman and Batman?
Yes.
Yeah, but if you think back, my first love was monsters. So, I got into the superheroes, but it's funny, those first comics that I bought, even the superhero comics, this was around 1974. When Marvel and DC were both pushing kind of horror because the Comics Code Authority had been lightened up a little bit as far as what they could show for horror magazines and horror comics. So like the first Spider-Man comic I had, he fought Morbius, the living vampire, and the Man-Wolf. The Fantastic Four, the character I was drawn to was the Thing. The Werewolf by Night was another first comic that I bought, so it's like, all right, I got into comics, but I was still holding on to my monsters.
Right. No, clearly.
Yeah.
And just, I was curious though, I know you obviously worked on the Phantom as well.
Mm-hmm.
And your take on the Phantom, in my opinion, was a darker iteration of it. I guess, do you on some level, do you feel like there's a more compelling side to characters when they do have some darkness in them? And they're not just clear black and white. There's more going on.
Well, it depends on the characters. I mean, we're all complex people. The thing about the Phantom, I don't know that I made him darker. other than stylistically, I made him, maybe a little bit more noirish, because I would utilize some lighting effects and stuff, the kind of stuff I would use in Batman, because Phantom's sort of Batman of the jungle. But what separates that character is that he's in the family business. I love characters that love what they do. And the Phantom always loves what he does. He's not one of these, tortured souls like, like almost all the other characters. This guy likes what he does. He smiles when he punches out bad guys because he knows they deserve that punch. So yeah, I like that stuff, and that's what I loved about Batman back in the day. Before he became this, Frank Millerized version of what the character used to be. He's I forget what's the word I'm looking for. He's self-absorbed.
Brutal.
He's brutal. Yeah, he's self-absorbed. He doesn't do anything for heroic means. There's a selfishness to the character today, which I don't like. The Batman I love was the one when they used to call him the Dark Knight. It was like, the Knights of the Round Table Knight, meaning that, he had a sacrificial life, that he chose to do what he did or what he does to prevent other people from having to go through what he did. So that is a heroic journey to me. So it's not about revenge. It's not about, oh, my parents got killed and I'm going to get even or anything like that. It's about, okay, I'm over that, but now I got to do something about it. And that's the aspect of the character that I loved, but has been lost over the last 20 years.
Right. No, that's very interesting. I mean, I think what you're obviously referring to, of course, is how Batman, first and foremost, it seems like he wears his heart on his sleeves, being a psychotic mess. Like he's a person who's got so much baggage as far as abandonment issues and survivor's guilt that kind of takes front and center in the stories. And some of the fun of the character reading a comic book can be lost with that. So I appreciate what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Now we're getting to we've got covered the introduction of your comics in general, but what was sort of your beginnings learning to illustrate and learning to develop those skills? Was there something in particular that got you into the practice of it?
Well, that same discovery of comics, I was drawing prior to that, just whatever. But once I adopted those comics, is when I started to focus on drawing comics. I used to copy, Dick Sprang illustrations and Kurt Swan and John Romita illustrations, because I really admired those guys' works. So that is what set me on my path to actually drawing comics, was copying, the comics of the day that I loved.
That's interesting. I feel like in any craft I hear when it comes to athletes or artists, it always comes from I saw something I enjoyed and I just copied that and then developed my own style from that. So that's cool. Because again, I'm not an illustrator myself, so learning more about that field is very interesting. Now, moving on from now, you've been introduced, you're practicing now. How did you go about getting into the industry? Like, what routes did you take? I went to the Joe Kubert School because I felt like that was my best entry into it, to learn the skills and the business of comics. I went there a year, ran out of money, went back home, went to a community college for a year, took art courses there, saved up money, came back for a year, ran out of money again. But by then my skills had polished enough that I could get some work in advertising. I had sold a couple of my classroom projects from the Kubert School to DC Comics for their New Talent Showcase book, because my teacher had just also happened to be the editor of that book. So that was a good in. And so just from that alone, it was worth it going to school, because I had contacts. I was able to make contacts in the industry and get my big toe into the door.
That's amazing. That's fantastic. And so currently I'm a comic book writer in the industry, but it's just as a writer. And I know how different it is, like back in the 80s when you first got going, really, really moving with DC and everything that you're making. I know that you're currently also an illustrator in the industry. what are some of the biggest changes you've seen from back into the 80s up until now? Is it just how the work itself is done, or is it how the industry regards the artist, or what are some of the biggest changes you've seen?
Well, there's been a lot of changes. The the industry has changed, technology has changed to produce the product. When I got started in there, not much had changed from the time, when comics first got started up until that point. It was still pretty much, you go in, you get an assignment, you draw it, you deliver it. Then came FedEx. So then you could actually ship the stuff in overnight. Fax machines came about, so you could send scripts. They didn't have to mail them to you. So those little incremental things changed along the way. And now, of course, with the internet and digital stuff, and I work digitally now on my iPad. So there's been a lot of changes from the technical aspect.
Has there been anything, I guess, artistically, like have the I guess the kind of things that the industry is looking for in the art? Has that kind of that aesthetic changed? Things you've had to kind of refine?
Well, that's constantly changing. The styles are always changing. What is hot one day won't be hot the other day. So what I always tell young artists is don't chase that. Don't chase that style. That was good advice given to me by Jim Aparo. Because when we were working on Nightfall, it was given the rise of Image was happening, and those guys were making money hand over fist, and kids were standing in line for their autographs and all that kind of stuff. And I was contemplating whether I should adapt my style or something like that. And Jim said, don't do it. Be true to your own stylistic ways, and find your own audience. And I thought that was really great advice. And I've done that ever since. Because styles doesn't mean good.
Right.
Whatever it is that's capturing it, you might be able to glean something from that to add to your own quiver of arrows, if you will. But it's not worth changing something or changing your own style, because that's going to change. The demand for that's going to change at some point.
Absolutely. It's great advice. Yeah.
Right. Now you brought up Nightfall and that run, obviously, and we're going down the timeline of being introduced to developing the skills to school. Now we're in the industry. I guess we'll get to the big meat and potatoes that everybody probably asks you about when it comes to Bane and the creation of him. Obviously, you have inspiration coming from like the Mexican luchador type era due to his outlook, but you were purely in charge of the design of the character, correct?
Yeah. The only thing there were certain aspects that had to be incorporated into it, because he was going to be addicted to venom, which was a substance that was created by Denny O'Neil for the Venom storyline that ran in Legends of the Dark Knight, where Batman gets addicted to this like super steroid because he's looking for an edge, and then it finds out it messes him up. So we were going to use Venom as a way to bring Bane into the storyline too. So he needed a delivery device, and I obviously couldn't have him, sticking needles in his arms and stuff like that. So I came up with the idea of the transfer up the arm and up into the wires in the head. And his belt is actually packets of venom, but I don't think it's ever been shown in the comics, and I stole that from Steve Ditko.
That's great.
Because Spidey always had the
extra web shooters,
the cartridges.
That's why Bane's belt is always segmented like that, because I always thought it would be cool for him to take one of those packets out when needed, slaps it into the wrist device, presses the button, and up it goes.
That's great.
Head.
That's great.
That's interesting.
I didn't know that, which is funny because I love utility belts that characters wear, but it's so rare that they actually matter. But I love that idea.
Yeah, I mean, I felt if he's going to be having a belt, it should have functionality to it, So,
absolutely. Absolutely.
I don't know why we never showed it, but there it is. There's the history.
Right.
Interesting.
Right.
As far as the design, no, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Charlie. Go ahead.
No, as far as the design goes, were you like a fan of wrestling at that point in time? What made you go with the luchador mask and that design in general? I'm curious on that front.
Well, I was a wrestler in high school. I lettered in wrestling.
Nice.
But
Me as well.
Okay, fellow wrestler.
you a wrestler?
I wrestled somebody, and I wrestled in high school.
Yeah, what weight class?
285.
Oh wow, 285.
Happy, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
He was the bane. He was the bane of his high school.
I think they used to call that heavyweight. Like past a certain point, I think it was past 220 and up. It was just one weight class, at least I think, when I used to wrestle back then.
Yeah.
But anyway, as far as Bane's look goes, because he was going to be raised in this like Central American prison island, whatever, I figured if he was going to wear a costume, what would he be inspired by? What would he have seen that would have, maybe given him some ideas? So I based it basically on that reasoning that, that might be something he would have seen on one of those televisions in the prison, some Mexican luchador wrestling type stuff. The original mask that I designed was a true luchador mask, and it's the mask they used in Batman the Animated Series, where his nose, his mouth, and his eyes were all exposed, just for functionality. If you ever wore a Halloween mask, you know how hot it gets in there. If you're just walking around trick-or-treating, try fighting guys, so I felt that it was important, again, functionality, but sometimes you got to throw that out of the window for just a cool look. And so we decided we'll cover him up, give him that mystery man look. And, but they've used that mask in other iterations of Bane, which is kind of cool, I think.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing. I love how, because that's another great lesson for aspiring artists and current artists to adhere to, is the idea of, yes, everything is cool, can be fun if it looks nice, but also having some practical reason why these things exist. You incorporated the belt, the utility belt he has for the Venom packets. You had the tubing. You thought about that. You planned that. His inspiration for what he was wearing based off his location and where he was raised. All that's really great, and it's seamless. It doesn't get in the way of the character. It adds to it. So I love that you did that. That's amazing.
Yeah, he's got the wrestling singlet for the top, and then he also has like military pants and boots, which was like Cuban revolutionaries, except they're all black because he's a bad guy, so black leather,
Yeah,
exactly.
Absolutely. That's great.
So what was it like seeing your character that you helped create, like being in the animated series and just being in media in general? Obviously, the animated series I feel like was the most accurate. We'll get into the other stuff in a second. But yeah, starting with the animated series, how was that, and how did you feel about people taking a liking to something that you helped create so much?
I enjoyed most of his animated iterations. The animated series was great. Young Justice was great. That was the closest one to the actual published Bane. When Danny Trejo did the voice for him, that was really cool.
And there's Santa Prisca,
yeah. The live action stuff, not so much.
So it's been a known thing on the podcast, and the disdain I have for the live action movies, because for me, when I would look at this character and knowing this character is one very self-made one. This character is highly intelligent and is very capable and methodical about the way he goes about things. And being in the movies, especially in the Nolan stuff, where he ends up being a patsy for Raish in the end, I'm like, that doesn't feel like that character. We've had heated discussions on the podcast with our friend Otis about my disdain from, they love him because of the movie, but me like going back to read some of his issues, and like I have my own idea of what the character would be like. So it's really validating that I can have somebody that created the person shit on these movies as much as I did. I hated his depiction in those movies.
They're terrible. I mean, the first one, Batman and Robin, the Joel Schumacher one. That's right. Yeah, he was just a big dumb knucklehead. Again, he was a patsy for Poison Ivy.
Yeah.
At least he looked like Bane, kind of an S&M Bane, but he looked like Bane. The Tom Hardy one was like, what the fuck? What is? I don't even understand what the hell that's supposed to be.
Or what he's saying.
Like a face hugger on his face. How does he eat? There's no mention of Venom, and yet at the end of the movie, he's able to punch through a concrete pillar. without breaking his hand.
Right.
You know, they hired a short actor. You know,
Yes.
they gave him a funky mask and a silly accent. I mean,
Yeah.
why call him Bane? Why not just call him, you know, Joshua or something? You know?
Mr. Joshua, right?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I love this because all the
Yes.
points you're bringing up are points I've said verbatim on here. Oh my gosh,
He
Yeah.
has.
my life
Well,
is made.
yeah.
I could die happy. I could die happy right now.
and
I've
then
been
they
validated.
kill him in a really terrible way, just kind of like an offhanded. All right, he's dead. He's gone. The whole guy who drove the plot of the film is dead in with a push of a little button from Catwoman.
Exactly.
Right. It's like how that's the most disrespectful thing you can do because Bane is
Yeah.
all, but he's all about hands-on grappling. That's his biggest thing. It's his bread and butter. He's a wrestler, right? He's a wrestler, and it's funny too because one of the biggest parts of Bane is, like you said, it's the injection of venom. It's how he gets bigger and buffer, and because he's originally he's not that big. He's a smaller person. He was a person that was obviously he's a prisoner. He was experimented on. He got made bigger because of the venom. So
No. Bane is a big man prior to Venom.
oh, he was okay.
Oh,
I
yeah.
thought he was
Yeah,
a smaller
yeah.
person.
No,
bigger.
he built himself up in prison.
Oh, nice.
Before they put the venom in him.
Okay.
Yeah, he's like, you know, when I draw Bane, he's the biggest bodybuilder you'll ever meet.
So the venom doesn't make him bigger; it just makes him stronger.
It wasn't originally. It was supposed to make him more pumped up, but not like Bruce Banner turning into the Hulk. You know, that kind of thing.
Okay.
But other artists have taken that license, you know, and ran with it. But yeah, so when I draw Bane, you can tell that I keep him more grounded so that even when he's all juiced up, he's still just the biggest freaking bodybuilder you're ever going to see, but still within human proportions.
That's interesting. That's a popular misconception. That's the Mandela effect. Okay.
Because you see it in things like the Arkham game series where he's tiny and then he gets huge out of nowhere, and again
he swells up.
Yeah, he hulks. You know, he hulks up. You know, and that's not who he is. You know.
No, well, I actually like the idea like you had that he actually does, because Bane is obviously every iteration. Well, the good iterations, he is an intelligent person. He's capable.
He's a tactician.
He's a tactician. The idea also that he's trained his body and his mind, kind of like Batman. It was like that's why he's able to beat him. So I like the idea that he actually already is a athlete beforehand, and then he just enhances it in some ways. Okay, that's different.
Yeah. Now he's a brutal fighter. There was a cage match in the first book, Vengeance of Bane, where they're fighting with shivs and then their hands tied up and stuff, and he, you know, like Conan in Conan the Barbarian movie, you know, he's just taking out all comers, you know.
That's great. Yeah.
The moment I love from that character in particular, I think you guys did it in the comic also, as well as the animated series. My introduction to the character was the animated series. It made me go back and try to find the comic and beg for it. Was the fact that he watched Batman, like he thought out his idea and his plan. Is like, all right, I'm gonna find out how he thinks, why he does what he does, and then I can beat him then. And then the fact that somebody can sneak up on Batman, like the guy that's in the darkness all the time, and his whole thing is creeping up on villains. He was like the Predator was the prey at that point. I'm like, this dude's badass. I love this guy. And now I'm just like, man, you just kind of take all that out with the. I won't be too bad to the live action stuff. I'll let it breathe. I made my point. I'm validated at this point. I don't need it. I'm perfectly fine.
Well, there's one thing I've always wondered, because Mr. Nolan, because I've realized more as I've gotten further into my career of writing that you're always taking risk, and that's kind of what makes it more fun, and it kind of what can help newcomers come to your work and appreciate it that much more. Were you worried at all when you were, given the task of creating the character that would break Batman's back? Were you worried that there'd be some backlash from fans, that people would be upset in any way that this guy, this new character, this new villain had somehow, seemingly paralyzed Batman?
No, the only fear was that the character wouldn't be loved, because it was necessary for the fans to really like Bane. I mean, not as an individual, but like him as an adversary for Batman, for it to work. So that was the only, worry that we had was, have we done enough to make this character, stupid little gnat, interesting enough for the fans to say, hey man, this guy could really take Batman out,
Right. And that's an accomplishment too. I mean, to actually make him A, believable enough that someone could beat Batman, and B, make someone likable enough that when he does beat Batman, the fans are actually happy, liking the character still, as opposed to ranting and raving against him. That's incredible.
Well, here's something else you probably don't know is that the whole reason that they decided to break Batman's back was because you have to remember in the early 1990s, the most popular characters at the time were the Punisher and Wolverine, and they killed their adversaries. And the fans were really starting to get that bloodlust and wanted Batman. They were writing Denny O'Neil, telling him, we want you to, we think Batman should be taking out these villains so they don't keep coming back and, doing harm to the people of Gotham. And Denny decided, well, let's give them what they want, but not how they want it, and to show them why they're wrong to want that. So the whole idea was to take Batman out, replace him with a more violent Batman who would kill, to show how great Bruce Wayne is and why nobody else can be Batman. So that was the premise.
That's great. That's fantastic.
To do Nightfall. It had a real purpose.
So with that, obviously John Paul Valley Azrael is like the main antagonist for that Nightfall run. How much input did you have on the creation of that character, or just because I know you did art for that throughout the series, but how much?
No, I didn't do anything in that series. That was
really?
Danny O'Neil and Joe Quesada created Azrael.
Okay.
Yeah, it came out just before Vengeance of Bane. So it's like that series came out, then Vengeance of Bane, and all that was set up for Nightfall.
Okay.
Interesting.
That's amazing.
Okay. Well, go ahead, Ethan.
No, it's like because there's so many moving parts to keep up with that it's even more amazing. You think about it, that all these things gelled together so well. That's some of the best, in my opinion, some of the best stories, some of the best arcs in the Batman lore, from spanning back to the 40s or whatnot. So that's incredible.
Yeah, the zeitgeist was there that during that era. You had the death of Superman too that was going on in the other editorial camp. And then we had Batman doing his thing, and we were selling a shit ton of comics.
Yeah, I bought them. I'm sorry, I have to head out here in a little bit here, but there's a little thing on the show that we do. It's a segment that I do called Either Or, and it's basically just where I asked our guests two different questions and kind of hypotheticals, and kind of get their feedback on what they would prefer. Kind of like a would you rather, so to speak.
All right.
So for you, I know you're a big fan of monsters, you're a big fan of comics, you're a big fan of all kinds of creation and characters and whatnot. And I know your own book, Monster Island, that you created yourself, is incredible. So I wanted to know, either you put Bane in the world of Monster Island and see what he would do as a ruler or a villain, doesn't matter, but you have a comic book centered in that world, or having Bane in the world of Dungeons and Dragons. You also worked on obviously Dungeons and Dragons properties. You worked on like Mines of Bloodstone. So either Bane is a hero or a villain in the world of Monster Island, or he's a hero or a villain in Mines of Bloodstone. Which do you think would be a more interesting or fun story?
I think the Dungeons and Dragons. It's an entirely different vibe for Monster Island. That was a much more tongue-in-cheek, lighthearted adventure tale, which I don't think Bane would fit into.
Okay. Perfect.
Interesting.
Perfect.
Yes, sir. So it's just the two of us now.
All right, and then there were two.
Exactly. I guess my last question for you before we get into your stuff that you want to talk about, as you're at the top of the hill now. Obviously, you worked on legendary stuff. You are a legend within comics itself. What would be your advice for somebody that wants to undertake this as a career path? Like, what would be your advice to up and coming artists that wants to get into this field?
Own your own stuff. Don't work for. You'll have to work for companies to begin with, but don't give away your ideas. Their best interests are not your best interests. So, keep your best ideas for yourself, and eventually, build an audience, and then publish it yourself and own it.
Interesting. That's great. That's great information. So now you wanted to get into one of your up and coming projects. I don't know if it's quite out yet with Alien Alamo, correct? Tell me a little
Yeah,
bit about
that's my newest one. You know, I publish all this under my Compass Comics banner. That's what I published Monster Island under. Last year, I published a horror comic called The Chenoo, and this year is Alien Alamo, which is in demand on Indiegogo. So far, I've crowdfunded $115,000 for it. We've got over 1,700 backers. It's doing really, really well. And I've got 14 pages left to draw of it before it starts getting put together and begin the process of printing and all of that. So we're coming down to the end.
That sounds great. For everybody interested, we're going to have the link to these comments that he's referencing in the description of whatever platform we put this on, so you can find it there. Obviously, is there anything else you want to plug or promote while you're here?
Sure. Yeah, I have a YouTube channel. On Wednesdays, I do a show called The Storytellers. I usually interview writers and artists in comics and talk about the techniques of visual storytelling. And during the month of October, on Saturday mornings, or I should say every morning, I do a show called 31 Days of Monsters, and I take a monster film or a sci-fi film and talk about it. So that brings us up to Halloween. We're on day 8 today, and tomorrow will be, well, I don't know when this is going to air, so I can't say tomorrow what it'll be because
it should be next Thursday is usually when I'll try to get these out. I'll try to get them.
Oh, okay. I'd have to look at the schedule and see. But anyway, if you just go to YouTube and type in my name, that's the name of my channel, Graham Nolan.
Got you. That sounds great. I'll be excited for that. That's great. It's again similar style that we do here, so that's great. For everybody watching, I guess we'll close out with our local promoting. We have a history of Halloween video essay that me and Ethan are working on putting together that we're gonna have out hopefully either this month or the end of this month. And then later we are producing our own comic actually that it should be finished up I think mid-December, and we'll go about getting that promoted and send out to everybody. So if you guys support us, we'd appreciate it. Thank you guys for watching. This has been, again, Mr. Graham Nolan. Thank you so much for coming on. You, again, are inspiration to many of us, and your work has helped change and influence a lot of people's lives. So I can only thank you, and thank you again for coming on, and thank you for your work and that you've done.
Well, it's my pleasure, Charlie. I thank you for inviting me, and glad to know that I can inspire other people. I want creative people to go out there and create great stuff, but I want them to do it for themselves and not give their ideas away.
Exactly.
You know?
Yes, sir. Well,
because
thank you.
The publishing paradigm has changed completely. It used to be to be considered a pro, you had to be working for Marvel and DC. Mm-hmm. But that's changed. Now with print on demand, the internet, you could print your own stuff, digitally, or you could crowdfund it. There's so many ways to get your message out there, to get your ideas out there. It's hard work. You have to put on a lot of different hats, but you can do it. And the payoff is that it's all yours, so, that's what I encourage all you guys to do.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Again, doing the same thing, hopefully to follow in your footsteps. Again, everybody, thank you for tuning in. This has been another episode of the Then and Now podcast.